welcome. My name is Ganithan Khoury, and I am the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum and Professor of Fine Arts and Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Brandeis University. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our land statement, which I hope everyone has had a chance to read and take in. Thank you. So I am extremely grateful to all of you for joining tonight's program titled Lyle Ashton Harris in Conversation with Robert Reid-Pharr. The program is organized in conjunction with the remarkable solo exhibition, Lyle Ashton Harris, Our First and Last Love, on view at the Rose Art Museum through July 2nd. We do hope you will come and visit the museum to experience this significant and very moving presentation of Lyle's work. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Robert Reid-Pharr, Professor of Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and Professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. This only until the end of the month, because as of July 1st this year, Dr. Reid-Pharr will hold the appointment at New York University as Professor of Social and Cultural Analysis. Congratulations, Robert, on this new position. And we're really sorry you're leaving the area, but we're all coming to New York to visit you. So tonight's public conversation is in many ways the continuation of multiple ongoing conversations between Robert and Lyle that had begun decades ago. Our guests, two luminaries, were part of an extraordinary community of artists, scholars, and activists who flourished with creative energy and cultural innovations, but were also devastatingly impacted by the AIDS epidemic. Lyle's photographic documentation of individuals and communities from that time, his Ectochrome archive, was the subject of Robert's deeply insightful essay titled, What Remains? I learned so much from this sensitive and rigorous article. So with your permission, before I turn the program over to Robert, allow me to just quote a section from the essay. And I quote, "The archive that Harris has passionately built is a remarkably intimate portrait of a progressive intellectual class in the act of coming to recognize itself. Harris's achievement is that he assembled such an extensive and compelling record of a key moment of cultural and social renewal, consciously or not. One wonders if he was aware of just how fragile that moment would prove to be. As we delighted in the flowering of youth, we were confronted with the harshest and most unforgiving reminders of frailty and mortality. Those of us invited to experience the images in this archive are thus asked to attend to the call for both celebration and mourning." End of quote. With these haunting words, please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Reid-Pharr. Robert?
Well, thank you so much, Ganit. That's a very lovely introduction. And I just want to say that I'm so very pleased to be part of the Rose community, let's say, and also to be part of this conversation. Also, I just think that the exhibition that you've done with Lyle's work at the Rose is one of the finest treatments that I've seen of his work, period. So I'm very, very excited about it. And Lyle, it's wonderful to be here with you. I'm going to just take a moment to introduce Lyle and embarrass him a smidge and say things about him that he doesn't like to say about himself because they're too beautiful, actually. Over his 35-year career, Lyle Ashton Harris has cultivated a diverse artistic practice ranging from photography and collage to installation and performance art. His work explores intersections between the personal, the political, and examines the impact of ethnicity, gender, and desire on contemporary society and culture. I also just want to say that Lyle's work is part of the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Hessel Museum of Art at Bard College, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, the J. Paul Getty Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum, the Tate Modern, the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Castilla y León in Spain, and the Museum for Gegenwartskunst in Zurich, among many other places. And also, Lyle has received a fellowship from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation in 2016, the David C. Driscoll Prize from the High Museum of Art in Atlanta in 2014, and the Rome Prize Fellowship in 2000, among many other awards and honors. Lyle, I first want to begin by asking you, how are you doing? And then we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you so much, Robert, for a wonderful introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I must say, so I was regrettably unable to see the audience, who's in the audience, but hi all. I am suffering. I have a little bit of allergies. So I want to just sort of say that, so bear with me. I'm doing well. I'm actually here. Have the great fortune to be at Anderson Ranch in residence for a couple of weeks. And so it's given me an opportunity to be here to do some printing in the lab. I haven't been in the lab in a couple of decades, literally in the lab. And I've been fortunate enough to have a young photographer come say a quick hi. This is Austin, who's a young photographer. He's going to be a junior where?
At Indiana University.
So we've been printing in the darkroom. He's been taking the lead. And so I just, in the interest of, let's say, passing it on, so I just want to say I really appreciate that the ranch has invited Austin to come in to work with me, and it's been good to be having an exchange. So he's been helping us set up. So,
before we let Austin go, I want to ask you another question. Then, if you're going to do that, you know, you and I met each other in our 20s. So,
oh my God, how old are you? I asked that. Yeah,
I'm 20.
He's 20.
So here you are, a bona fide art star, and rearing up the next generation of bona fide art stars. What's that process like for you?
Well, I kind of just am taking it day by day. I would say I just love photography, so I'm just happy to be helping out Lyle, and we're having fun in the dark room. So that's another. I would say we have fun.
Yes, absolutely. I'm learning a lot. So
yeah.
So let me just say that I want to first thank Director Denise, friend Corey, and Madeline Delphi for organizing this talk. I did not have a copy of the Aperture book monograph on the Today's Judge Nothing That Occurs, that she wrote a brilliant introductory essay. And I didn't have a copy of the book here, but I did have my assistant Benji text me all the pages, and I had a chance to really, to read again. So it was just really profound. So I want to just sort of say that, just to echo what Gannett was saying. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much to say that. And Lyle, you've had so much influence on.
Why the work? Wow. Okay.
Here's a remarkable image of it.
Well, it is interesting thinking about the triptych in the previous image in relationship to this work, which was my my graduate thesis at CalArts, my MFA thesis at CalArts, and although it became a work, if you will, an edition of 6. Initially, it was a projection, as you can see from this slide right here. I had been assisting the architectural leading photographer, Tim Street Porter, and I was assisting him, and he was shot for Condé Nast, etc. So we were on an assignment. I was on assignment with him, assisting on an assignment, I should say. I encountered the two blackamoors on a private residence overlooking a pond with 50 black and white swans, just to give you the scale and the atmosphere. So I was struck when I first encountered these blackamoors. So I had Tim take a slide of me. But then a couple of years later, a year later, in preparation for getting ready for the thesis show, I had an experience with one of the professors at CalArts, and we sort of inspired, let's say, this piece of writing. This text that they woke up in the middle of the night and just sort of, obviously I didn't have, I think I wrote it out as opposed to, I didn't have an iPhone to dictate it to my phone at that time, but it was the idea. I might record it, who knows, but somehow this sort of came out in the middle of the night. You get those, can't sleep, and then something is like inside of you that has to get out, and sort of like with the pressure of the clock in terms of the show coming up, and also the sense of pleasure, but also anxiety about trying to think about how do I want to frame that particular experience at CalArts, et cetera, also in relationship to the image. So this is the text for the for that.
Well, we let people sort of enjoy the image or read this text, that one of the things about it that you and I, where you and I actually are connected, is that I became at exactly the same time of life super interested in archives. And it's an interesting thing that you talked about having been at Wesleyan, the student of Hazel Carby. Hazel Carby is one of the most important.
Robert Amelia, the great Robert Amelia as well. Yes.
I was Hazel Carby's dissertation student. And
oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. And so you see those,
I love that.
Those avenues are actually quite narrow when you get down to it. I want to move on to this remarkable photograph that you took of Bell Hooks and Marlon Riggs. I believe that this, I want to know, was this at the famous Downtown Black Cultural Studies Conference?
No, this was not. I mean, obviously Bell and Marlon were both there and delivered brilliant, presentations. But I was fortunate, blessed, if you will, to have met and befriended both of them. So this was, it looks like it could be at Bell's apartment, former on Perry Street, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you can verify if you.
It's so funny. When we began the conversation, Lyle, I said that one of the things about thinking about our time as young men was that the men whom I most miss, including Marlon Riggs, whom I adored, I really liked him and respected him, and thought he was very sexy too. And so it's shocking to realize how young they actually were. And so I'm looking at this image now, and I think, look at these kids, including Bell Hooks, who has acne, and in this image. Also, I just can't take my eyes off of their teeth and their skin and their vibrancy and nails and the sheen of them, in a way that it's a funny thing to have an old memory of young people.
With regards to that, what you just said, Robert, I think is important, because I think that's one of the issues that you brought up in your brilliant essay, which I highly encourage people to read. Perhaps you could put the link, Gini can do that near the end. But I want to pivot, because from the position of having lived, because just in terms of, because one could, to your point, to point out the teeth and the vigor of youth, if you will. What does it mean to have actually be witnessing that from the position of aging yourself? Because I think, in a way, that is maybe the second part of, let's say, that maybe did not get addressed in your essay, in terms of like, what does that feel like in terms of be embodying a body that maybe, well, Bella obviously did. I mean, she passed away a couple of years ago, but in terms of like, what does it mean when we talk about, in your essay, about Essex, for example, and us missing out on him having been a middle-aged man, So how does it feel to be a middle-aged man, to be reflecting on that, if that makes any sense?
Well, it's a good segue to the image that we're looking at now. This is Sonia Boyce, Isaac Julian, and Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall has also passed away, but all of them are also looking amazing. And
Yeah.
you know, and when I remember being around Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall I'm only a little bit younger than his children, but I remember Stuart Hall at exactly this time and thinking, wow,
Yeah.
this man is ancient and yet so attractive.
Yes, I mean, you spoke about that quite eloquently in your essay. I mean, it's also I think it's important to talk about, and maybe you could address that, is at that moment, did we imagine, for example, if we go back to the previous slide, at that time, or was that part of the grand vision or a possibility that Sonia Boyce would represent Britain in the Venice Biennale, as she did last year, or the fact that Isaac Julian would be having a major retrospective at the Tate? So I'm just trying to think about, I think it'd be important, let's say, for the audience, particularly for the young people in the audience, where they don't, and I think as it talks about that, what was at stake at that particular time, for one, and then also the power of the imagination to envision possibilities that we might not have known, but in a certain sense, given where we come from ancestrally, that we did have a grand vision to make that possible. I'm just trying to think about that, in terms of shift that language around what that actually means in terms of, so I think it sort of relates to the Asian question, what does it mean to be alive, to be witnessing this today, and also to impart that knowledge to a younger generation who may take it for granted, who may just assume. So I don't know, it's just something, maybe it's a rhetorical question we can just put out there that the audience can do their own heavy lifting after our conversation or what, but I think it's just a question to put out there. So
I don't think that there's a proper answer to that. I will say that part of what, having lived particularly through the AIDS disaster, a horrible reaper wiping down literally dozens of my friends, hundreds of people that I knew, is in fact that I realized that in fact time goes on, and I'm more hopeful than a lot of people I see today.
When I first rediscovered the archive, as you know, the archive, I had deposited the archive in my mother's basement when I won the Prix de Rome in 2000, because I rented my Chelsea studio out. That was the first and last time I did that, and did everything out. And then everything went into storage with the exception of these photographs and my grandfather's archive, which I deposited in my mother's basement, thinking that would be safer, at least spiritually, that would, have that energy of the family. So when I upon my return from living in Ghana, as you know, I lived there from 2005 to 12, the ending of a 7-year relationship. And at that time, Isaac Julian was getting ready for his show at the 10,000 Waves at the Modern. He asked to use some of my snapshots, and I had assistant retrieve the slides from my mother's home. And so all of a sudden, after being 7 years in Ghana, I was confronted with this archive of this time capsule, if you will. So the archive was something that is a repository of images, obviously, but what was important for me and also for the work in terms of like, what is a work that came out of the archive? So hence I'm gonna, so we not talk too much about it, that this installation right here was first, it's called the Ectochrome archive, that was first shown at Sao Paulo Biennial, and then in the Whitney Biennial in 2017, and has since shown internationally. In fact, there's a wonderful, most recently, that the ICA in Miami, Jean Morano curated a show, and there's a wonderful publication with amazing essays by Jafari Allen, who's going to be just got an appointment at Columbia, and Darius Bose, Black perspective and Black gay habit of mind. But anyway, so it was important that I complicate the narrative of the archive, both conceptually and structurally, et cetera. So it is interesting if you think about this installation shot right here. The image on the left is the projection is the Crips and the Bloods from the truce that I was, not only I was in Marlon Riggs' posthumous film Black is Black Ain't, but I was also still photographer. So I would not have had access to certain parameters, certain spaces, if you will. So I'm indebted to him, you know, for just his, not only his, you mentioned his beauty, but his grace, and also just in terms of like the open-heartedness in which he embraced me, you know, as a mentee and as someone he looked up to as well. So it was a type of mutuality, similar the way in which you even bring Austin over. It's a type of like, you know, something that, well, you and I, how we live and we grow and we thrive. And then the image in the center is of a Beth, famous model and excuse me, and owns a model agency, and Russell Simmons, and it is from the Blackmail Dinner. So it is interesting just thinking about how the archive shows the shift in, and that's what I think is important for the younger generation, because we just now, if you think about the all of this backlash globally against, let's say, gay and lesbian rights, as trans rights, et cetera, the fact that at that moment, what it meant for me being a young photographer in the Blackmail show and having to use a camera to negotiate where there might have been elements of hostility towards queerness, if you will. I mean, I think, you know, so it is interesting how the archive in a way allows for that type of frisson or tension, and I think that's part of its, you know, strength. And I think your essay really addresses that. So
let's go through some other images.
yes. Am I talking too much, or is this?
You are a being, not your genius is only met by your beauty. You be free. Speaking of genius and beauty, this is the grandest example, and an amazing.
Just oh yes, yes. I love the, also this is at Lace, right? It's a Lace in 92, and he has you see the cover, right? I mean the books, it's the two classic Black histories of brother to brother, and what's on top? Can you see that? It's brother to brother in the light.
Yeah.
I mean, I love what you said about, I mean, they broke the mold with Essex. I mean, you know, there was nothing and will ever be like that. You know, it's almost the level of, I don't know, authenticity in the light of such syntheticness that we can experience today in a post-internet. Do you know what I mean? Just in terms of like, I don't know. But
I should say for people in the audience who don't know that Essex Simple was rather remarkable poet and performance artist and activist who has inspired a generation of creative people and who himself is having a big renaissance now in the poetry world.
Absolutely. Well, and also he was also collaborated with the, you know, great filmmakers Marlon Riggs and Isaac Julian. He was featured prominently in Isaac's seminal film, you know, Looking for Langston, as well as, you know, Tongues Untied. So yeah. So this is when Essex was out. I believe this is when he was out for a Getty Humanities Fellowship. And both he and Marlon would stay at the apartment that I share with Tom and Gear on Hobart Street in Koreatown, LA.
Thank you. You know, this is a detail from the show, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about something that strikes me with your work, and it's the lushness and plenty of it. And so not only is this full of color, but it's full of objects, it's full of images. And I've wondered for a long time whether or not that's an answer for you to the sort of scarcity of the Black archive or the Black queer archive, or however you want to say it. why so full? You know, why is it, why so much? Why do you like that, that thickness of your palette?
Well, I mean, I would never, I don't think I don't think it's a scarcity. I think that's we have to stop replicating when there's actually a deep reservoir globally and historically that continues to be mined. So I think it's important that we don't like put that idea of lack into the universe, maybe in terms of how maybe there's a lack of critical language around it. But in actual, one could say that we're actually experiencing a renaissance. For example, when I came up in my discussion with Kahindi, just in terms of thinking about someone like him operating on the, I mean, so just thinking about, it's important to think about language around that. But I would say there is maybe an opulence, but there's also there's also a discretion around that. You know what I'm saying? That there is a opulence and a formal engagement, but it's always applying pressure to the content. So that's something I've always, let's say, struggled with. The fact that it's clearly conceptual driven, but also there's a deep formal palette, if that makes any sense. So interested in much more compression, accumulation, but compression, and making the viewer engage, using the opulence, if that's the term you use, or seduction, what have you, to bring them into the language. But then at that point, there is a possibility for conversation, if you will.
Lyle, I think that what you've just said is so remarkable and so moving. And can I just say to you, on the other side of the archives divide, I work in traditional pen and paper archives. And one of the things that is continually said about African-American people, BIPOC people, people of color, generally, LGBTQ folks, is that there's no evidence of us. And it is always said by people who haven't done a damn bit of work to go and see if there's such a thing in those archives. And what you find is if you look a little bit to the right or the left, you find an enormous amount of material. And that you're exactly right that the issue is sort of interpretation, how you interpret all of that often quite negative material about us, but that exists in droves and in even traditional archives. I think that that's amazing way to think about it. And if I might say one other thing, you know that I'm writing a biography of James Baldwin.
We're waiting with bated breath.
As am I. And so
first of all, congratulations for getting access. I mean, that's amazing. That's a huge for all who are listening.
Well, this is
that's a huge fee.
The Baldwin Archive, the grand majority of those papers are available to everyone at the Schomburg and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and at the Beinecke Library. The issue is this: the problem is there's too much of it. And so what happens when you get into representations of Black folks that are over full? And I think that so much of your work speaks to the way in which Black people are both under and overrepresented, you know, and how it is that we negotiate that. I think it's one of the things I find quite genius.
I love that. But we're looking forward to your particular precision in cutting through that. You know what I'm saying? Because even like, I mean, clearly Hilton has done a remarkable work around Baldwin in the last several years. But I'm also thinking about that people often, let's say, carve out their own perception of what Baldwin is. That's functional for them, as opposed to dealing with the fullness and the complicatedness. And I think that's often the case. I still think that, you know, I mean, speaking very directly to, you know, obviously American culture, but African-American culture in terms of like our capacity that needs to expand, be able to deal with the richness and the complexity of ourselves, as opposed to somehow just deciding to select a certain part of a certain history. I mean, I still think we're living under the shadows of the great architect of the March on Washington, Bayard Rustin. And I still think there's the legacy, you know, the trauma around that we still operate, that will select certain aspects of our heroes, but not the full complexity, if that makes any sense.
It does.
So-
I have a trick question I want to ask you. You said that you think that people are choosing images of James Baldwin that they need versus something closer to the bone of what he perhaps was actually like. Am I fair with saying that?
Well, I mean, not everyone, obviously. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I just sort of feel like I'm just arguing for, in terms of the importance for dealing with the space for the ambivalence, and
Do you believe that you
contradiction. And that's what, well, I'm sorry.
do you believe that you run are in danger of such sort of overinterpretation and underinterpretation in your own work as well?
Good question. I mean, we all have our faults. I would say, I don't know. I just sort of feel like maybe we'll pivot onto this, but it is an interesting question. So, did you know Lyndon Barrett, the great
I did.
literary theorist?
Yes.
So this is titled Oracle. Do you know he's in this piece? Were you aware of that?
I did not know that. Can you
Let's talk about because I mean, apropos your question, this is titled Oracle, and it's the last of the shadows that were produced, and it's from the, I should say that Caitlin and Lauren, the curators of the show, when they initially approached me, they were thinking more of a survey show, and I was more interested in really trying to think of a more conceptual way to think about the show, but really grounding on the present. So they brilliantly decided to use the shadow works, these unique assemblages, as the conceptual anchoring for the show, and there are clusters around that. I mean, so this one happens to be in the category, and I'm gonna butcher, but it might have to do with like desire and violence and death, if you will. I don't think the death is one of them, and inside of this particular piece right here, which is 2 dye subs, which are inset in a vintage kente cloth that I acquired from a friend of mine, the late I lost man, an Ashanti, Kwame, who was as I mentioned, a vintage kente dealer, and this is actually Ewe Kente. And the 2 dye subs, which are aluminum images baked directly onto photographs baked directly onto aluminum, are inset into this kente cloth, which is on another substrate, just to give you some formal, background of the work. But if you look in the lower part of the panel to the left, is Lyndon Barrett, who did that very important. He did a really good essay. One essay that I actually looked at for my Billie Holiday series in Callaloo. But maybe you could tell the audience who Lyndon was. And in this constellation, there's also another African American professor who was killed by trade. So it's about the complicatedness around desire. I mean, I think one of the things that came out, I think in Darius Boss's book, when he spoke about the idea of double cremation, the idea that often, at least at the emergence of the queer movement, as we know it in the US, again, lesbian women, I really should say, that often Black men from middle-class backgrounds were doubly vulnerable because of the racism they experienced in the wider white gay community, but also the homophobia that they experienced within the Black community, and they were often victims of trade. But in this situation, that a few professors were actually African American men who were actually killed around the same time. So when I talk about trying to deal with our histories, how do we create language or skin around that? If that makes any sense. If you think about,
I very much understand that. And I wanted to just say that Lyndon Barrett was African-American literary and cultural critic who is almost exactly the age I was. He was at the University of Pennsylvania in graduate school when I was at Yale. We graduated more or less the same time, and he went and took a job at the UC system and was murdered. And so I was well known by many people.
Yes.
in a tragic way, and is still mourned by many people. Well, I also want to take this opportunity to ask you about your, I think, the use of this antique kente. There are multiple pieces that you have done with this, I understand. Is that true?
Well, there are to date 21 shadow works, and those are going to form 8 of which, or 10 of which form the basis of the show, the traveling survey show, and going to be all 21 of them will be in an upcoming publication that the Rose and Gregory R. Miller Publishing, forthcoming with Queens next year. But all of the fabrics were acquired should we go forward? So we skip the bunch, but yeah, so the first shadow, back please. The first shadow on the right,
this one here?
Go back one please, sorry. Thank you, this is great.
I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Please go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, let's stop here. Okay, let's stop here. So basically, the work I was just mentioning, oracles on the right. That is a montage, as I mentioned, that's embedded in kente cloth. The image on the work on the left, which is called Obsessao, was initially shown in the Sao Paulo Biennial. You can go forward. Go forward, please. And this is the original installation, and this is part of a series of blowups that had begun in 2005, and that in 2017 or 2016, I installed this with a team for the Sao Paulo Biennial. Then as you can see in the background, that was on the wall when you first encountered my install. Then you went inside to a larger installation where you can see the Ectochrome archive with there's a photograph of Glenn Lagan and Nan Golden, as you can see, looking through the mirror. So go forward, please. So this is just a detail. As I mentioned, the blowups began in 2004, and I've been producing them. I've done several thus far, and this one, what's interesting about Obsessao is that for me is that it chronicles several things. One, that it chronicles the working through of the Ectochrome archive book that for Aperture, which features your essay, because in here are actually several scores of images that were used to the whole editing process, if that makes any sense, in terms of what image was going to come in, which was not. Additionally, you have other images, post-its, so you can see the image of Cornel West and Marlon Riggs on the upper right. It also, documents just the working through process, through accumulation. It also, a lot of the imagery was, since it was in Sao Paulo, a lot of the images were actually acquired when I first got to Brazil to incorporate, to locate the blow up collage within the context of the country that I was.
Lyle,
So
it's so funny the way that you're talking about it. I think you're missing the point that this piece is asking for a fight. You are all
what do you say?
oh my gosh. It is so in your face. Come on now.
Well,
Look, for one thing, I just want to point out that it's called obsessao,
Yes.
or whatever the pronunciation is in Portuguese. And so it's already obsession. It really is clearly about archives. And it's clearly about, oh no, again, the archive is actually packed with Black images, is that we don't necessarily like the Black images. So the place where it gets naughty is that this is the grand Marlon Riggs in conversation with the Cornel West. And you go a little to the right over here, there's a little peekaboo section with the man in the rope. And over here next to Cornel West, to the far left, is Cornel West at the Black Popular Culture Conference. I believe that is Houston Baker to his left. And another little peekaboo image to Cornel West's right. This is not this is a critique of, or this is an in-your-face expression of the Black archive as obsession, And as too
I love
much
that.
versus, and as too much versus too little, with a
Yeah.
little bit of respectable archive thrown in.
I
And
love
don't you
that.
think? There's no way you could not have been knowing how aggressive this work is.
Well, the thing is, I mean,
It's so bold.
Bob, I don't really, the thing is, it's funny you should say that. I don't really, I do what I do, and then, you know, that's what, if you even go back to the image right here, the one that the second peekaboo image you pointed out, and the post it says, you know, Oakley got upset when this was in the great Oakley and Razor, when this was in a book that he published with Octavia Zaire, and supposedly a lot of people who it was in the catalog, and a lot of people could not send their cat with a group show, and a lot of people could not send the catalog, you know, to the family because of the photographs. So anyway, but the point being is, I can see what you're saying. I think I'm interested in that frisson, that tension that exists, you know, in life, you know, in desire, and, you know, in all of our desires and sexualities, regardless of where we are on the spectrum, whatever. So I think it's around flushing that out and giving a space in which that actually is, you know, and that's part of it's humanness, if you will.
Lyle, again, what I'll say to you is that people who work in the most traditional of archives on Black stuff, the archive looks a lot like this. It really does. We imagine that it's a place of grand respectability and noble persons being presented, and that's some of it, but it looks like it's a mess. It's a mess. I'm gonna move on. Whoa. Can you just talk about this image for a second?
You know, one of the beauties of the show that's at the Rose now, is that I work with Caitlin and Lauren to select works to, I think at least a third of the works I've never shown before, or the works might have been published, but they were from my own archive, my own collection, and that was important that and including this one, which is a work from, I think, 2002, and in fact, I credit the late great Harley Baldwin, who's the founder of the Baldwin Gallery in Aspen, because the last time I was in Aspen was for a show that this work was actually, I don't think it was shown in the show, but he commissioned me to do, at that time, I met up with my friend Tim Halen, to do a series of self-portraits. In fact, they were, and they still are, the landlord to Gucci and upscale clothing, lingerie. And he said, maybe do a couple of self-portraits for like one of the smaller spaces in the gallery. And I think, as you know, with creativity, Robert, you never know when you're going to hit it. You know what I mean? The thing is, so I had actually 2 years before that was at the American Academy in Rome. And I remember listening to a lot of Billie Holiday, and this is done around the same time the Billie Holiday series was done. I'm just sort of giving the background for it. So, and so anyway, so this is a series of works. It's what is entitled Bloom 4, and I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, I think for me, okay, I'll just say that I think this is the first turn to self-portraiture after many years, and I think, what year is it again? Let's just see. So we're talking about, I have, you know, I had a crash, you know, I crashed a car, like, you know, going from in 92 from 2 hours outside of Paris. Well, realizing that the fragility of life, you know, I'm beginning to get sober. You know, I'm also trying to complicate the notion of self-representation. There's something, I don't know, I was also thinking about, I mean, it anticipates many years later the flash of the spirit war, you know, in a lot of ways. So these are 16 years before the show that I did in New York with Salon 94, that was based on Robert Farrar's, you know, great Harris Thomas's book, Flash of the Spirit, that I at Wesleyan in my sophomore year. I mean, what do you think of it?
Well, first, I just want to repeat, because there were some problems with your audio, that that part of what is inspiration for you is Robert Farris Thompson's work, Flash of the Spirit, so that people can hear that. The first thing that comes to my mind is that it's totemic, that it really is a fetish object that you have created, or a prayer object. And I'm interested in that because I, in fact, was raised a Pentecostal and it was raised a very religious person in a devout family. And I'm no longer a religious person, but that type of worship and lowering yourself, or being frightened in front of the mystery of creation is something, or amazed in front of the mission of creation is something I think that we need. We are going to run out of time, so I'm going to rush a little, as I've been bad.
Okay.
This is another detail from the work. And can I just point out the works on the right, the two pieces, and have you talk a little bit about those? They're so amazing.
These are all part of the Flash of the Spirit show, but I think we have some details coming up, don't we?
Here we go.
Yeah.
Wow. What is this?
This is a part of that same series. It's this was shot in Provincetown in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as you know, my great uncle Harold Epps worked in West Africa during the 60s and 70s, and he is someone who I highly respect and regard. And while growing up, his home, his and his wife's home, Pat Epps, was another safe home for me. Like, I grew up in a wonderful, family in the Bronx, but it was also good to have my uncle Harold and Pat, where I would go down, and when I should have been hanging out, being at school, I was actually going to clubs and crashing there with their daughter, my dearest friend Alex and Ayana.
I'm going to run through these, and if you want to stop me, do.
Good to maybe talk a little bit about these. These are the shadow works, as I mentioned, and this is the shadow works that really grateful that the Rose has acquired. It's found a proper home, and it's called Succession. And this work, again, it's two dye subs and embedded in Ghanaian funerary fabric. And this Speaking Archives, not only there are multiple images of me, but there's also there is an image of my brother and I with my father, taken by my grandfather, who, as you know, shot over 10,000 slides over a period of let's say 4 or 5 decades, and he was highly influential for both my brother and I my practice.
And I want to make sure that this that I heard correctly, that this work has now been acquired by the Rose.
Yes, it has. Super excited about that.
Oh, goodness gracious. We actually have come to the end of our time, almost on time.
Oh, great.
As if we're actually Western men, persons. And I think that there are some upcoming events that I should announce as well. Look at this. Oh, I'm going to run through them slowly, give people a chance to see things that are happening at the Rose, which, by the way, if you have not been there, is a fantastic structure.
That looks fantastic.
Thank you so much. Oh my God.
Thank you so much. So we're not doing any questions, right? Or
I think we've run out of time.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you so much, Robert. It was a real pleasure spending time with you, and I'm super excited you're coming to New York, and much congratulations on your new appointment.
I'm
And
virtual
we're-
hugging. I'm virtual hugging.
until in person.